Hey everybody, it's Party Elite, and today we're following up on our early look at the Shadow and the Blade DLC, taking a deeper dive into all things Dark Elf. We're going to be taking a look at all the new units that the Dark Elves are getting, including regiments of renown and lord options, and we're also going to touch on the Skaven spells of ruin. Well, just the one new one. Before I dive in, I'd like to thank Creative Assembly for giving me an early access key so I can provide this kind of coverage. There's a lot more to come before the DLC releases, and I'll be doing a review and kicking off a new Let's Play soon as well. But that's all in the future. Let's not waste any more time with that. Let's dive in to today's topic of conversation. First things first, as last time, we're going to discuss our outlier first. Many of you noted that with Skitterleap now in the Skaven spells of stealth, what's taking its place in the Skaven spells of ruin? Well, Flensing Ruin is a new spell that's being made available to the lore in place of Skitterleap, and it's a pretty solid spell from the looks of it, though it's costly to cast at 16 winds of magic. It deals direct damage for 14 seconds, ideally used against individuals, and it also reduces armor by a nice 30 points. Overcasting increases the duration of the spell to 20 seconds for 6 more winds of magic. Now with that out of the way, let's turn our attention to the Dark Elves. First off, the titular character, one that we've been waiting for a very long time, Malus Darkblade himself. He costs 1600 points as a base value, but between Spite as a mount, Deadly Onslaught, and the Warp Sword of Cain, his cost can go right up to 2345. Being on Spite increases health, armor, speed, weapon strength, and charge bonus, and of course makes him a large entity. Whether mounted or not, his melee attack and defense stats sit at 60 each, though his armor piercing value goes from 280 up to 315. Probably to nobody's surprise, Malice is a good fighter. He also causes fear and has a 15% missile resistance. The Warp Sword of Cain is his one item, replenishing hit points and providing 5% damage resistance as long as he's engaged in melee. I imagine this is an item he'll always bring because it's guaranteed value and costs just 237 points. On top of all of that, he's got a few abilities he brings with him for free. The Demon's Curse is an area hex ability that lasts for 12 seconds and drops enemy melee defense and leadership significantly within a 40-meter area. The Blood Price is an augment that gives Malice massive buffs to armor-piercing damage, damage resistance, and weapon damage. Unfortunately, both of these abilities also cause some damage to Malice, reducing his hit points while they're active. So they might give some great bonuses, but they also give some great malices. And finally, we have the ability innocently named Sarkhan. A transform-type spell, this is the big differentiator for Malice. Giving Sarkhan control over his body, Malice regains all his lost health and vigor, gets unbreakable, immunity to psychology, frenzy, higher melee attack, weapon strength, and charge bonus stats, and has his abilities replaced by some pretty solid new ones. Reaper of Souls is a direct damage ability that lasts 9 seconds and damages enemies in a 30-meter range, while stealing their hit points to replenish Malice. And Bloodstorm is a great buff to damage resistance that comes with an explosion that causes damage and tosses enemies around. The downside to this transformation is that it will constantly drain hit points off of Malice, and if you're not careful, or you time things poorly, he will die. I think that makes for a pretty interesting gamble in the middle of a battle. Those boosted stats can go a long way, but time it wrong, and you'll have lost your leadership. The High Beastmaster is the other Lord type, coming in at a cost of 1,132 points, able to ride in on a Scourge Runner Chariot for 500 more points, or a Manticore for 750 more. The former increases health, armor, speed, and charge bonus for the cost of melee attack, melee defense, and weapon strength stats, though it also gives anti-large armor-piercing range capabilities. The latter simply increases health, armor, speed, weapon strength, and charge bonus for a slight cost to melee attack. A decent anti-large focused lord choice, the High Beastmaster has a weapon strength of 440, which accounts for 130 armor-piercing damage, and a bonus versus large of 25. Apart from charge defense against large, the Beast Slayer ability also helps against large enemies, giving a 17-second boost to armor piercing and regular weapon damage, while bumping the bonus versus large by 16. Whiplash is another great ability that can target allied units that aren't lords or heroes, buffing their charge bonus, weapon damage, speed, and armor-piercing capabilities. Apart from that, there's the standard stand your ground ability as an option as well, and items include the Featherfoe Torque to reduce armor and melee defense of flying units, and the Tormentor's Sword that freezes enemies around the unit for 9 seconds while also dropping their melee attack. The High Beastmaster seems like an excellent pick for use against armies that are guaranteed to bring large beasts in. Using the Tormentor's Sword alongside an anti-large beast hunting squad will likely yield instant results, and the Manticore option can certainly provide some air superiority as well. The Master is the lesser form of the High Beastmaster, coming in as a hero option who provides anti-large armor-piercing capabilities. There are a variety of mount options, from Dark Steeds to Cold Ones to Cold One Chariots, and finally, the airborne Dark Pegasus. The Cold One Chariot replaces anti-large for anti-infantry capabilities, but otherwise, the changes to stats are as can be expected, with buffs to health, armor, speed, and charge bonus across the board, and variations of buffs and debuffs to melee stats that you can see on screen now. Apart from Foe Seeker and Deadly Onslaught, they can come to the field with the Guardian ability to help nearby lords and heroes with 15% physical resistance, and the Helm of Many Eyes is an item that provides allies with buffs to armor and melee attack within a 40-meter range. They're also able to come in with the Potion of Strength, which would be quite helpful if timed correctly, with its 50% buff to armor piercing and regular weapon damage. Among the units, the Scourge Runner Chariot comes first, costing 950 points. These guys have a really cool design. I just absolutely love the look of them. They're extremely fast missile chariots who can fire anti-large armor-piercing shots while moving. That's 40 armor-piercing missile damage and a 40 bonus versus large, alongside an 18 bonus versus infantry in melee. Chariots as they are, they can be used to cycle charge and slaughter soldiers on foot. Their melee stats make it clear though, they're definitely not supposed to stay in melee for prolonged periods of time. At 1,250 points, the Ravagers of Rakarth are the Regiment of Renown variant, coming in with better leadership and melee stats on top of a higher missile damage that also causes poison, alongside the 40 armor-piercing missile damage and bonus versus large. Alongside that, the Barbed Net ability is a constant in a 45-meter range around the Ravagers, slowing down enemy units and reducing their missile resistance. This will probably make a nice pairing with the regular Scourge Runner Chariots when focusing down units like, say, giant dinosaurs. The Harpies are getting a Regiment of Renown now as well. At 850 points, the Crows of Cain have the standard buffs to stats that ROR get, but they also have a new ability called Crow Feast that allows them to regenerate hit points as long as they're in melee. In skilled hands, I'm sure they'll make very good harassment tools that can keep themselves alive by simply doing their job. Next comes the Bloodrack Medusa, quite a hefty new addition to the Dark Elf armies. They cause fear and terror and have middling melee stats, though the weapon strength on them is a great 390, of which 260 is armor piercing. Their ranged fire comes in the form of their gaze. It has a really cool visual effect, and it hits the enemies with magical damage that is armor-piercing with 60 points of armor-piercing missile damage, and also explosive with 120 points of explosive base damage, and an additional 60 points of explosive armor-piercing damage. Their range is alright, so they will likely get focused down early to eliminate them, and with the little armor they have, the Bloodrack Medusa can really melt away if you're not paying attention. The Siren of Red Ruin is the Regiment of Renown counterpart, buffing stats as expected, but also coming in with the Wail of Malice, an ability that can be used twice to cause direct damage to foes in a 30-meter area around them for 7 seconds. It's a short burst of damage, and it is often resisted, but it can definitely help turn the tide in a pinch. And finally, to top it all off, the Bloodrack Shrine is a Medusa mounted atop a shrine, giving it anti-infantry weapon strength with a bonus versus infantry of 20, but terrible melee stats. From range, the Bloodrack Shrine fires those same magical damage shots that are armor-piercing as well, and they have similar numbers to the regular Bloodrack Medusa: 60 points of armor-piercing, 120 points explosive base damage, 60 points explosive armor-piercing. It can fire while moving, which is very helpful when closing the gap to an enemy to get some early shots in and get that early damage in, and it can also cause fear and terror, so you might want to push it into melee to help with terror bombing, but quickly pull out because of those horrendous stats I mentioned earlier. Apart from that, 25% missile resistance and 25% magic resistance should help with survivability. Going into melee does provide some buffs. The Aura of Agony and the Aura of Ardor can be helpful in supporting troops, the former by hurting enemy leadership and melee defense in the area, and the latter by buffing allied melee attack and leadership in the same area. Used wisely, these can turn the tide of an engagement to help even out the odds where needed. In today's battle, I wanted to show the new Dark Elf units off against the rats that they're being posed against by this DLC. I played a handful of battles for this one, but I felt like the one I'm about to show you best showcases some of the risks and rewards built into Malice and the slew of new units coming to the battlefield. So this is probably not the most ideal build with the new units or anything, but I just wanted to show everything off. You can see the front line over here just consists of some bleak swords and these witch elves right behind them. But to the left over here we have Malus Darkblade atop Spite, and we have a master alongside him on a cold one as well. We've got these 3 units of chariots, the Squadron Chariots, one of them being the Regiment of Renown, while on the right side we've got a bunch of Bloodwrack Medusa, one of them being the Siren of Red Ruin, and one of them being atop the shrine with the Bloodwrack Shrine. We also have the Regiment of Renown, Crows of Cain Harpies up over here, and you'll notice something very quickly on the other side of the field. The Skaven we're up against are using the campaign-only unit. So in custom battle, as some of you have already seen, you are able to now bring in campaign-only units, and that goes for the Empire as well. So if you want to see some of those cool units and see what they can do in custom battles, that is an option now. But yeah, off to a slow start, just getting into position, obviously not able to see much over the cusp of the hill, but just pushing forward ever so slowly, going over the stats and everything, making sure I know exactly what I'm using and what I'm up against. But yeah, I kind of get into position over here. I want to try and get these Bloodwrack Medusa to come in from the flank and maybe get some shots in with their explosive shots, while the Harpies over here, you can see, are being pushed back to hopefully shut down some of the range support that the rats have brought to the field. And you can see over here, I've got these Squadron Chariots moving forward, try and get some damage done onto these rat ogres over here just to hurt them so they're not able to do too much work to my front lines. And you'll see we do a decent bit of damage from these Squadron Chariots. Every hit does a fair bit of hurt, and every once in a while we actually get a solid shot that straight up kills the rat ogres. So a good bit of work being done, and you can see we do have Ixcha's Triads chasing after some of my units over there, so I will turn around eventually. But yeah, you can see we're doing some decent work against the rat ogres there, and you can see now we pull back, but of course we can fire while moving. Unfortunately though, they decide to fire instead at some of these Ixcha's Triads, and even then doing a fair bit of damage, causing a fair bit of hurt. You can see the Harpies have pulled really far back, again looking for an opportunity to dive into something over there, while at the same time paying attention to my chariots over here, making sure that the gaps don't get close to them too much, because then, well, we'll be in trouble again. They're not really meant for melee. A couple good charges maybe, but they shouldn't get stuck in on melee. While back over here you can see, of course, we're trying to avoid some decent casts of bound abilities, I suppose, doing a fair bit of hurt to my bleak swords, but I'm not really worried about the bleak swords. They're just there to hold lines, basically. And you can see ultimately these rat ogres are starting to get pretty close, but we've done a fair bit of damage to that one unit that we've been focusing on as these chariots continue to pull back. You can see at the same time, in comes the Flensing Ruin. So that's the new spell that I was talking about earlier, reducing armor over here, and it causes damage to combatants. Now it's best used like Spirit Leech, where it focuses on one particular unit, an individual entity, but over here the AI decides to use it against some bleak swords instead. And at the same time, you can see over here we have both Malice as well as the Master diving into the Warlock Master, and they're coming in with Deadly Onslaught active for both of them, and Malice is also using the Blood Price. So that will cause a little bit of damage to him, but it increases his armor piercing damage and weapon damage, and it also gives him some damage resistance. So hoping to use that against the Warlock Master nice and early. But you can see Malice does get hit by the Assassin's Trophy right away. So he's in a bit of trouble because we do have Ixcha's Triads there as well. So a little bit of a scary situation. But you can see as we're pulling back over here, our Harpies over there get horribly obliterated. All that range fire coming through. And at the same time, on this right flank, you can see the Bloodwrack Medusa have these really cool animations. Like I was saying earlier, love the way they've been implemented. I also love the audio that comes with it. It's this really bassy boom. So the Medusa, they basically stare at their targets. We're firing at the Doombringer Warp Fire Throwers over here. So just stare at their targets, and it feels like a fairly long reload time, I think. But they sort of arch back and fire shots out of their eyes, and it's got this really great explosive effect as well that just blows people up. In this case, rats, I suppose. I really like the look of it. It's really nice to see, and you can see it's doing a fair bit of damage as well. Between, I think, just 2 volleys, the Doombringers have been brought down to about 50% health. And of course, at the same time, we also have the Bloodwrack Shrine with that same Medusa atop it, firing away as well. So I'm hoping to get some damage into these clumps, because again, there's explosive damage involved. So I'm hoping to do hoping to do a little bit of damage over there like that. At the same time, you can see these chariots continue to pull back. Some decide to charge in to some of these clan rats and the plague monks, but these chariots back here still firing away at some of those rat ogres. And you can see that the warlock master managed to get away. So our master and Malice are both in relatively tough situations. Not that I noticed, because I'm far too distracted by the animations off of these Medusae. So they're firing away still, trying to get rid of the warp fire throwers over here. And you can see again, we've done some decent damage, but it's about time for me to dive into melee. And like I've said before, they're not the best in melee. They've got middling stats. They'll do okay, but they also cause fear and terror, and that can be really helpful, especially in this situation. You can see at the same time, Malice over here is trying to get away alongside that master as well. I find myself in a bit of a precarious situation. Of course, we've got the warp fire's wheel as well as the black hole flares in here, so a bit of a scary spot. But you can see now 2 units of rat ogres giving up on the fight because these chariots back here are also able to continually fire away, while back on the right flank, we're finally charging in with the Medusae, and you can see in comes the Siren of Red Ruin with her Wail of Malice. So it only lasts a short amount of time, but it's this large area where it will do a touch of damage. So just hoping to get a little bit of damage done over here. At the same time, you can see Flensing Ruin does come down atop this Medusa, again causing a little bit of damage and reducing armor for just for a moment's time there. But both of them now diving in, staying engaged against just some lowly clan rats, so I feel like my chances are pretty good in that situation. At the same time, back over here, you can see another charge coming through from these Scourge Chariots. These clan rats just standing there, willing to eat the charge, and with a decent charge bonus of 63, the Squadron Chariots will do a fair bit of work over here. So pretty happy with how these chariots work, and at the same time, of course, they're able to fire as well. So thankfully, they're firing away at some of these rat ogres back over here. But you can see the master, despite being armor-piercing and anti-large, finds himself in a terrible situation. So I need to try and pull that master back. While back over here, you can see Malice decides to dive in again, chased down by some of these warp fire's wheels and the plague monks as well. So a bit of a trouble spot, while my Medusae back over here are firing away at these plague monks as well, because again, they've got physical resistance, so using that magical damage output from the ammunition to try and get rid of these plague monks more easily if possible. And you can see we're doing a fair bit of damage over here, so pretty happy with how that's working out, but it doesn't look like these bleak swords are going to make it through, and Malice is also in a terrible situation. And once more, this warlock engineer just diving away from Malice, not wanting to get that engagement, but I send my master in there with deadly onslaught and foe secret, hoping to get a little bit of damage in. Again, he's anti-large, armor piercing, so that should help. And you can see over here, take a look at those death dealers firing away at our Bloodrack Shrine back there. While back over here, you can see Malice is in a terrible spot. He tries to pull back into safety, dives on in to those death dealers, but I don't yet want to pull the trigger on my transformation. At the same time, Murderous Prowess and Mastery are kicking in to help us out wherever possible. You can see we've done a good bit of damage across the board against the Skaven, but they do still have some strong units still standing. Back over here, these chariots managed to get this unit of rat ogres to completely rout, but at the same time, you can see Malus Darkblade with just 209 hit points is routing as well. So now is probably the time to pull the trigger. If he returns from that rout, it's probably time to pull the trigger. Back over here, meanwhile, at the same time, you can see the Warlock Engineer, or sorry, the Warlock Master is also running away, but my Master himself is also terrified. But let's take a look at Malice over here as he's pushing through. Scared of that assassin, of course, I decide to trigger the blood price. For some reason, that was a mistake. That could have been extremely deadly. I could have completely died off, but I also decide to pull off the transformation at this point because Malice is at 123 hit points. The transformation will completely replenish his health, and it'll also make him a bit more beastly. So there's Sarkhan now, and he's got his own set of abilities. Like I mentioned earlier, he's got his own set of stats, and again, Unbreakable, Frenzied, full health, full vigor as well. And you can see right away that assassin decides to just leave. He's like, this is not what I signed up for. I don't think he wants to be here. So he decides to pull back and leave, while now I have to be very quick with the use of Sarkhan as well, because again, it's going to hurt our hit points. With every tick that passes, our hit points are going to drop. So I decide to dive into the closest possible unit and just get a little bit of damage and get as much damage in as possible wherever possible. While back over here, you can see the Warpfire's Wheel has actually caused a fair bit of hurt to the Bloodrack Shrine. Got stuck into melee for far too long, I think, and now it's on its way out, while this Medusa over here continues to fire away, and this Medusa as well still firing away, while some of our Bleak Swords back there are chasing after some of these range units. You can see over there, I just used our explosive ability. The Bloodstorm increases damage resistance. It's a decent spell to use. I was just using it out of desperation. I want to try and get as many units to rout as quickly as possible as we get some more charges going down over here. As you can see, I'm sending these chariots in. Like I said, I want to get as many units routing as possible before Malice dies off, because he is losing hit points right now. So take a look at those beautiful charges from the Ravagers of Rakarth there as well, throwing these clan rats back, as back over here we have these Scourge Chariots looping back around and throwing these clan rats forward. Really a big fan of these new chariots. I always like some good chariot play, and in the hands of good micromanagers, they can be absolutely insane. And you can see Malice, meanwhile, chasing down some of the Eye Takers over here, again, trying to get them to rout. Down they go. They're willing to rout as well, while over here, you can see I've got the Siren of Red Ruin trying to get a little bit of damage done as well. I do have to be wary of Ixcha's Triads over here. Of course, they are anti-large and armor-piercing, so I have to be wary of that, and we've got the Rat Ogres there pinning us down as well, so might have been a better idea to pull away and run away somewhere else, while you can see the Ravagers of Rakarth looking for a place to dive in as well, while back here, unfortunately, the Squadron Chariot gets bogged down by the Black Hole Flayers and is in a little bit of trouble right now, as back over here again, you can see I decide to use a little bit of magic in the form of Malice's abilities just to try and keep him replenished and healthy. It's not the best place to use it, but again, I'm trying to just cause as much damage as possible, wherever possible, and trying to keep him alive at the same time. At the same time, you can see the Assassin is about to dive in, and this is a bit of a trouble situation because Assassin's Trophy is down on Malice as well, so I decide to pull him away and maybe get some charges to finish off Ixcha's Triads, maybe get them to completely shatter, maybe dive on into the Plague Monks as well. I also decide to use Bloodstorm once again. Kind of a poor use. The explosion did nothing there, but the damage resistance should have been helpful, at least momentarily, should those Eshin Triads turn around and start causing some damage, poking and prodding at us. You can see I'm returning the Bleak Swords as well from the far-off lands to try and bring them back over here and engage against the rats. I've also got the Bloodrack Shrine pulling back in, while off in the distance, a lot of these Chariots and the Bloodrack Medusa, the Bloodrack Medusa are rallying as well. So trying to get everybody back into the central position and hoping to finish some more units off. You can see Malice is in a pretty precarious situation, just under 50% health, still being chased by an assassin, so I have to be very careful about where I send him, and I think I'm trying to turn him around and send him down this way into these clan rats again to try and finish them off. While here, the Siren of Red Ruin is dealing damage to these Plague Monks again, hoping to finish these units off as quickly as possible as the Scourge Chariot gives chase as well. Off in the distance here, meanwhile, you can see we've got the Ravagers of Rakarth also giving chase, I think wanting to maybe turn some of these routes into shatters, because otherwise, I mean, these Death Dealers, despite routing, they were firing away, but now they are shattered, so I'm feeling pretty confident about that situation, but again, Malice continues to slowly die away. I decide to turn him around and push down towards these Rat Ogres, hoping to finish off some dangerous units, while back over here, you can see we do have the Warpfire's Wheel pushing in towards the Bloodrack Medusa as well as the Bloodrack Shrine. I do get caught up in melee, so again, armor-piercing damage on the Bloodrack Medusa, so it's not a terrible situation, but the stats certainly aren't the best, so a little bit of a precarious situation, but I was too busy looking at Malice over here, who goes diving to the Plague Monks and also uses that explosive ability once more, using Bloodstorm this time to good effect, and you can see just how much damage that does to these Plague Monks. Of course, it's magical damage, so their physical resistance counts for nothing, and pretty happy with that charge and explosion. I think it did well for us, and then pushing through, trying to get away from these Rat Ogres, but you know, health is so low, I may as well dive into them. These Plague Monks have decided to rout. They might turn to a shatter, hopefully, while off in the distance over here, you can see these Chariots continue to get some work done, chasing after some lowly clan rats over here, maybe turning around to push into some of these Plague Monks as well. Just get whatever we can to shatter. While back over here, you can see we've lost to Medusa, and we're losing this Bloodrack Medusa as well. Routing, giving up on the fight, pulling back into safety, while the Shrine itself, I think, has already been driven off the field. So they didn't really do so well against the Warpfire's Wheel, but I should have expected as much, and it's an unfortunate situation for myself. And at the same time, you can see Malice over here, on death's door over here. I decide, you know what? He's only got a few seconds left. I'm going to turn him around. I'm going to go diving into the Rat Ogres. I pop Deadly Onslaught and hope for the best, but unfortunately, he does drop dead. So despite me pulling the trigger on that transformation at the last possible moment when his health was just a sliver on the screen, I wasn't able to keep him alive through to the end of this battle. So a very risky gamble there if you time it wrong. Meanwhile, down over here, you can see the Assassin is going toe-to-toe against the Siren of Red Ruin. I pull her off to the side so I can get some magical shots coming through. A couple of misses over there, but the Assassin is pretty low on health and on morale, so I feel like with some decent micromanagement, I should be able to come out on top over here. You can see we dive on in, toss that Assassin back, and in comes a shot as well. Looks like the shot does do friendly fire because it does have the explosive damage, but the Assassin ultimately now is routing, so it might be time to turn around. But you can see we do have this Medusa now completely out of ammunition, so she's only going to be used in melee, and again, not the best stats, middling stats, but at least that weapon strength is decent and armor piercing. And you can see the balance of power is really not in my favor, so I am trying to do a little bit of cleanup off in the distance. You can see these Chariots chasing after various units, trying to get all these routes into shatters still, and that's been more of how I've used these Chariots than not. I haven't really used them as anti-large missile chariots, except for at the beginning when things were a little bit more organized, but as things fell into chaos, I decided to use them as chariots charging into infantry whenever the opportunity presented itself, trying to cause some damage, trying to get these people to rout or shatter, or, you know, just crush them and make sure they can't come back later on in the battle. Because again, if you look at the balance of power, really not looking too hot for me. And I think that's primarily because of this Warp Fire's wheel. So that's what I get for wanting to show some of those campaign unique units, I suppose. This is the punishment I receive. This unit does have regeneration, so I'm in a little bit of trouble. The longer it lives, the better it'll, have done, I suppose. But off in the distance, you can see I'm still cleaning up some of these units with those chariots. And again, they're just such beautiful chariots. It's a joy to see them riding around. And now over here, you can see I'm just trying to figure out who should I target first. Who is the bigger threat to these Medusae, which I believe is the plural. And these bleak swords are basically just there to, I don't know, be an extra layer, I suppose. I ultimately turn my gaze to the Warp Fire's wheel because I figure, you know what, it's regenerating, but if I can cause enough damage quickly enough, I might be able to drop it completely. Let's keep our distance from these Rat Ogres, especially since the Rat Ogres seem to be pulling back towards these chariots. We're going to make them chase the chariot instead. You can see we're getting some shots in over here from the Siren of Red Ruin, and we're about to dive on into melee as well. And we do a decent bit of damage on this second charge. You can see drops by about maybe 5% of health or so, but of course we receive a fair bit of damage as well. So now it's time to sort of separate a little bit and try and take care of these Warp Grinders before they're able to do anything too clever or cheeky. They get terrified off pretty easily. And over here you can see we're just going to be cycle charging because it's about balancing our morale as well as the damage output. Whale of Malice comes through to cause whatever little damage it can cause. It doesn't do too much for us, especially because it's countered by that regeneration, but I figured now is the time to use it. Now is as good a time as any to use it. Well, back over here you can see we do have the Bloodwrack Medusa again diving into melee, not doing too much on the charge. They're getting tossed back, but I decided to pull up the Siren of Red Ruin back as well to maybe get some shots in. My hope with charging is to use the charge bonus, and it is a decent charge bonus. Not only to get that extra damage in, but also to get that charge benefit to morale, because like I said, morale is extremely low, and charging gives you plus 15 morale, if I recall correctly, so that might just be what I need to stick in this battle, basically. So in we go again, and you can see that Siren of Red Ruin does do a fair bit of damage on every charge, but she does get tossed back rather easily as well. It feels like they're it's like they're top heavy or something. But yeah, we've got the Warp Fire's wheel sandwiched, basically, taking advantage of that situation. While back over here, we're going to get another charge from the Ravagers of Rakarth, moving right into the Plague Monks over here. Of course, that barbed wire, or whatever it is, the barbed net, sorry, reduces their speed as well, so they're going to have a harder time getting away. I mean, they're not as fast as chariots as it is, but it's just nice to note that that's going to help us out if they do decide to try and escape. But ultimately, the Plague Monks are dropping pretty easily, though I do have to be wary of those Rat Ogres that are coming back there to reinforce them. Back over here, meanwhile, you can see we're taking a fair bit of damage. Balance of power is still not in favor of me, but I'm just trying to, again, cycle charge as much as possible to keep morale up, to keep those charge bonuses used. And you can see the Warp Fire's wheel has taken a fair bit of damage, so the two Medusae have done quite well. With a fair bit of micromanagement, they've done quite well to eliminate a Warp Fire's wheel that was at, what, about 75% health or so? So pretty happy with how that's turned out. But you can see over here, the Ravagers of Rakarth have completely routed. They're giving up on the fight, so I'm a bit of a rough spot right now, especially because the Scourge Chariots, they're pretty low on health as well, and I have some risky charges to make towards these Rat Ogres, or near the Rat Ogres, I should say. Now, the Ravagers of Rakarth have decided to come back into the fight, and over here, as the Warp Fire's wheel is giving up and routing, I decide, you know what, it's not worth the chase. It's just a little too fast for me to close the gap, and I think I'd be better effort better spent turning around and trying to eliminate some of these units and maybe causing a mass rout through army losses. So you can see now I've got the Ravagers of Rakarth as well as these Squadron Chariots. I keep changing how I pronounce that, my apologies. I have them pushing in from multiple directions to try and bait out the Rat Ogres, and you can see that worked over here. So I turn these guys around and pull back, and I send these guys back in. Now the Rat Ogres now are pushing that way, so now I turn these guys around and push them back in that way. The Rat Ogres are of course very terrifying for me, but ultimately you can see they decide to move on forward, so I'm able to go in with some really nice charges into these Plague Monks and more or less eliminate them. They're already basically dead, but I have to make sure I can destroy them without losing any of my units to, morale or anything like that. The Rat Ogres immediately actually turn around and chase after my chariots, while I turn around over here and push into the Warp Fire's wheel, again getting a little bit of that magical damage in, but mainly charging in for the charge bonus and that bonus to morale as well. So coming in from both sides, sandwiching that wheel, causing morale damage with the charge from the rear there. The Rat Ogres as well, very low on health right now. Hopefully I can focus them down and get some damage to morale as well, and you can see in it comes, and just like that, by the hair on my chin, the rats have lost, and the Dark Elves win. Now, granted, it was a Pyrrhic victory, but I think I took a few risks over here with the units I took to the field and the composition I took to the field. Overall, though, you can see those Bloodwrack Medusae. My god, those kill counts, especially the one atop the shrine. absolutely ridiculous. Now, Malice seems to have underperformed, but that's mainly because he was chasing after enemy leadership for the most part and was being chased down by assassins. But once he flipped into Tsarkan and I was just throwing him into anything that I could, he started causing a fair bit of damage. The Master, unfortunately, I think was poorly utilized as well, but a fairly capable Guardian type unit. If he'd stuck closer to Malice for longer, I think Malice would have probably done a fair bit better. So there you have it, folks. Taking Malice to the battlefield is a great idea, but be careful about when you bring Tsarkan in. Pulling the trigger prematurely, even as a result of desperation, can prove extremely costly, especially for a campaign. The new Chariots are pretty impressive tools, dealing out decent damage, and I think the Medusa, I think they're certainly interesting additions that will find good use on the battlefield. As always, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on what you saw today. Any ideas or curiosities about how the new units might be used? Any outlandish concepts you'd like to try and execute? Let me know in the comments down below. And as always, if you have any questions or concerns about the DLC, let me know down below as well, and I'll answer as soon as I can. As always, remember to subscribe for more Total War and strategy gaming content, including a new early access Let's Play and review of the Shadow and the Blade, as soon as I can release them, of course. A massive thanks goes out to all of my channel members and patrons for supporting the channel on a monthly basis, and a huge thanks goes out to each and every one of you for watching. Until next time, cheers.